At the divorce hearing, my husband looked proud. "You'll never touch my money again," he hissed. His mistress leaned in, whispering, "That's right, sweetheart." His mother smiled from the front row, adding, "She doesn't deserve a cent." The judge opened my letter, scanned it, then laughed hard. He said quietly, "Oh, this is good." They looked terrified as the laughter echoed against the mahogany walls. Grant's smirk didn't just fade, it turned gray. He didn't know the envelope held more than just ink. The courtroom smelled of floor wax and stale air. Light from the tall windows caught the gold link of Grant's watch. It was a beautiful piece, the same one he used to check whenever I spoke too long. Beside him, Claire adjusted her pearls with trembling fingers. She was younger, thinner, and currently wearing my favorite necklace. I kept my hands flat on the table. My wedding ring was gone, leaving a pale circle of skin. That mark felt like a target in the heavy silence. For years, Grant called my marketing career a hobby. He said I needed to rest while he managed our future. Rest eventually became a locked bank account and a shrinking social circle. Lydia would drop by to remind me that a good wife protects the family image. I became a ghost in a mansion by the river. I watched them move money like chess pieces. They thought I was a naive observer. They forgot I spent a decade teaching students how to track digital footprints. It started with a single bank statement left on the marble counter. Grant was sloppy because he believed I was broken. I saw a transfer of $180,000 to Panama. The name on the account was a shell company I had flagged years ago. I didn't scream or cry that night. I simply waited for the house to go dark. In the blue glow of his office, I photographed every ledger. The camera shutter sounded like a heartbeat in the quiet room. I met my former student, Marlon, in a crowded cafe. He wore an FBI badge now, and didn't smile when he saw my phone. He told me I was standing in the middle of a federal laundering web. If I wanted out, I had to go back inside and record everything. I wore a recording pen to dinner parties and charity galas. I watched Lydia toast to honor while her offshore account swelled. Every nod I gave Grant was a calculated lie. My silence was a trap. The judge looked up from the letter and signaled the bailiff. The heavy doors at the back of the room swung open. Men, in dark windbreakers, moved with clinical precision toward Grant's table. He tried to stand, but his legs seemed to fail him. Lydia clutched her designer bag, as if it could save her from the handcuffs. I stood up slowly and smoothed my gray dress. The judge caught my eye and nodded once. The game was finally over and the board was mine. Grant gripped the table as the federal agents surrounded him. The pride that had puffed out his chest minutes ago vanished. He looked at me, his eyes wide with a frantic, animal energy. "Adeline, tell them this is a mistake," he stammered. I didn't move a muscle. I watched the lead agent click open a briefcase. He pulled out a stack of documents with Grant's signature in bold, red ink. The air in the room felt suddenly thin. The mistress, Claire, began to sob. She reached for Grant's hand, but he pulled away. He was already calculating how to save himself. Lydia stood frozen, her face a mask of pale foundation and shock. She tried to speak, but only a dry rasp came out. The judge leaned back, watching the scene with clinical interest. I felt a strange, cold peace settling over me. The courtroom drama was just beginning. This was the moment I had bought with my silence. "You think you've won, don't you?" Grant hissed as the cuffs snapped shut. His voice was a jagged edge. "You'll have nothing when the government seizes these accounts." He stepped forward, but an agent blocked his path. I finally spoke. My voice low and steady. "I already have everything I need, Grant." I pointed to the judge's desk. There was a second envelope there that he hadn't noticed yet. It held the key to the legitimate holdings he thought he'd hidden. Lydia finally found her voice. "We took care of you," she shrieked. "We gave you a name and a home." She looked around at the reporters, desperate to save her status. The cameras flashed, capturing her unraveling in real time. I remembered the Target gift card and the diamond bracelet. I remembered the way she looked at me like I was dirt. I didn't feel pity for her. I only felt the heavy weight of the truth finally being told. The agents led them toward the side exit. Grant kept looking back, his expression shifting from rage to pure terror. He saw the reporters scribbling in their notebooks. He saw the life he built dissolving in a sea of ink. Claire stumbled behind him, her heels clicking rapidly on the floor. She looked small and broken without his protection. The power dynamic had shifted entirely. I was the only one left standing at the front of the room. The judge cleared her throat and looked at me. "Mrs. White, we need to discuss the remaining assets." I nodded and walked toward the bench. My lawyer followed, carrying a heavy leather briefcase. We had prepared for this for months. The legitimate marketing patents were still in my name. Grant had forgotten to check the small print on our early contracts. He was too busy hiding his own crimes to see my moves. I was finally touching the money. Outside the courthouse, the sun was bright and unforgiving. I stopped on the top step to breathe. The air tasted like freedom and old rain. I saw a black sedan waiting at the curb. Marlon was standing there, his arms crossed over his chest. He didn't smile, but his eyes were kind. He reached out to open the door for me. As I stepped inside, I noticed a man in a gray suit watching from the shadows. The man in the gray suit turned his head toward me. He didn't look like a reporter or a curious onlooker. His eyes were flat like wet stones. I ducked into the car and pulled the door shut. Marlon saw him too and tapped the driver's shoulder. We pulled away from the curb before the shadow could move. My hands were finally starting to shake. The adrenaline was fading and leaving a cold hollow in my chest. We drove through the heart of Nashville toward the FBI field office. Marlon handed me a bottle of water. "Grant isn't the biggest fish in this pond," he said softly. I gripped the plastic bottle until it crinkled. I thought the courtroom was the finish line. Now I realized it was just a loud opening bell. The White family legacy was tied to something much darker. Grant was a pawn in a game I hadn't studied yet. Inside the office, the lights were harsh and buzzing. Marlon led me to a small room filled with filing cabinets. He pulled out a crimson folder and laid it on the desk. "Look at the legal representative for the Panama holding," he instructed. I leaned in and saw a name I didn't recognize. It wasn't Grant or Lydia. It was a man named Victor Vane. My breath hitched. He was the man in the gray suit. "Vane is the architect of the entire network," Marlon explained. He pointed to a signature that looked like a jagged scar. Grant was just the local face for the laundering. If Grant talked, Vane would lose everything. That explained why the man was waiting outside the courthouse. I wasn't just a witness against a cheating husband anymore. I was a threat to a criminal empire. The weight of the crimson folder felt like lead in my hands. I realized then that my safety was an illusion. The immunity agreement I signed didn't protect me from a man like Vane. I had to find a way to make myself untouchable. "I have more files," I lied. Marlon looked at me sharply, searching for the truth. I needed time to find something Vane actually feared. If I didn't find leverage soon, the courtroom victory would be my last. The room felt smaller with every second. We spent 3 hours mapping out the connections. I used my marketing background to visualize the flow of illegal capital. Money moved through real estate like water through sand. We found a link to a construction project in North Tennessee. Vane's name appeared on the deed for a massive distribution center. This wasn't just about moving cash. They were building a physical infrastructure for something worse. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air. Marlon stood up to answer a ringing phone. He listened for a minute and then turned pale. He hung up and looked at me with a grim expression. Grant just made his first call from the holding cell, he said. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. He didn't call a lawyer, Adeline. Grant had called the man in the gray suit. Now the two men who wanted me gone were working together. The news of Grant's phone call hung in the air like a heavy fog. Marlin began pacing the small office, while his radio chirped with static. I needed to find a way to break link between Grant and Victor Vane. If they collaborated, they could erase the trail I had worked so hard to uncover. My objective was simple: find the leverage Grant was using to keep Vane's loyalty. I sat back down and opened the crimson folder. I scanned the distribution center blueprints again, looking for any missed detail. The construction site was located on a swampy patch of land near the river. I noticed a series of irregular subterranean levels that didn't match the building's stated purpose. They looked like specialized storage vaults rather than standard industrial basements. My fingers traced the ventilation shafts on the diagram. These weren't for air. They were designed for high-end security and climate control. This was a private vault. Marlin, look at the depth of these foundations, I said, pointing to the blue ink. He stopped pacing and leaned over the desk to squint at the numbers. The subterranean levels were reinforced with lead-lined concrete and redundant power systems. This wasn't just a laundering site for local cash. Vane was building a central hub for physical assets that the digital world couldn't track. This was where the actual family secrets were buried. The power balance shifted instantly. I realized Grant didn't just have information. He had the master key to this facility. He was holding the location of the physical vault over Vane's head. That was why the man in the gray suit was still waiting outside. He wasn't there to kill me yet. He was waiting for Grant to give him the sequence. I felt a surge of cold clarity. If I could reach the site first, the leverage would be mine. The hunt had moved. We need to get to that construction site tonight, I whispered. Marlin shook his head, mentioning the lack of a formal search warrant for the river property. I knew the law would be too slow to stop Vane's cleaners. I reached into my purse and pulled out the old spare key to Grant's private safe. I had taken it months ago during a late night sweep. It was a heavy, notched piece of steel. It felt like a jagged tooth. We left the office through the basement garage to avoid any watchers. The city lights blurred into long streaks of neon as Marlin drove toward the river. Rain began to smear the windshield, making the road look like black glass. I checked my phone one last time before switching it to silent mode. My marketing background taught me how to spot a lie in a brand. Now, I was searching for the lie in a landscape. The river was rising. We pulled onto a dirt path a mile from the main gate. The distribution center loomed ahead, a skeletal frame of steel against the dark clouds. There were no guards at the perimeter, which felt like a deliberate invitation. I gripped the heavy safe key until my palm stung. As we stepped out of the car, a single red light flickered on a nearby pole. It wasn't a security camera. It was a motion-activated signal. Someone knew we arrived. The red light pulsed rhythmically against the falling rain. Marlin drew his weapon, his frame shielding me from the open marsh. We moved toward the skeletal structure, our boots sinking into the thick Nashville mud. Every shadow seemed to stretch toward us like a grasping hand. My objective was the heavy steel door at the center of the concrete slab. Oh. The pressure mounted as the sound of a distant engine echoed over the water. Vane was already coming. We reached the entrance. A reinforced hatch secured by a biometric pad, and a manual override. The electronics were dead, likely fried by the same system that triggered the red signal. I pulled the heavy, notched key from my pocket. It fit the manual slot with a sickeningly smooth click. The door groaned, fighting decades of rust and secrecy. As it swung inward, a rush of cold, recycled air hit my face. The abyss below smelled of ozone. The stairs were steep and made of industrial grating. My heels clicked rhythmically, an unwanted metronome in the hollow space. Halfway down, the emergency lights flickered to life, bathing the concrete in a sickly amber glow. I saw the vault. It wasn't a room but a series of high-density storage lockers. Each one was labeled with a year and a family name. The power balance shifted as I realized Grant wasn't just laundering money. He was archiving debt. I ran my hand over the cold metal of the 2024 locker. Inside, I found leather, bound ledgers and hard drives rather than stacks of cash. These were the real assets. They contained the private indiscretions of every powerful figure in Tennessee. Grant wasn't just a businessman. He was a blackmailer. This was why Victor Vane was so desperate to protect him. If these files went public, the entire state hierarchy would collapse. I grabbed the nearest drive. It felt warm. A heavy thud echoed from the top of the stairs. The hatch slammed shut, cutting off the sound of the rain. I looked up and saw the silhouette of the man in the gray suit. He didn't rush down. He simply stood there, blocking our only exit. "You were always too smart for your own good, Adeline," he called out. His voice was calm, almost fatherly. He held a small remote device in his hand. It looked like a detonator. Marlin aimed upward. But the distance was too great for a clear shot in the dim light. "Drop the drive," Vane commanded. He stepped onto the first landing, his shadow growing monstrous against the wall. I tucked the drive into my waistband, the metal biting into my skin. I needed a distraction or a way to equalize the threat. I noticed a fire suppression tank near the lockers. It was filled with pressurized CO2. I signaled to Marlin. He understood instantly. He fired a single round into the tank's valve. A massive cloud of white gas erupted, obscuring the entire floor in seconds. I lunged toward the back of the vault. Searching for the secondary service tunnel I saw on the blueprints. My hand hit a cold lever just as a second explosion rocked the building. The floor tilted violently beneath my feet. This wasn't a fire suppression system. The vault was designed to self-destruct if breached. The white gas swirled like a ghost around my knees. The rumble of the foundation suggested the building was collapsing into the swamp. Marlin grabbed my arm and pulled me toward the service tunnel. My lungs burned from the ozone and the dust. I clutched the warm, hard drive against my ribs. Vane's silhouette vanished in the haze above us. We needed to reach the secondary exit before the concrete sealed our grave. The ceiling groaned with the weight of the rising river. We scrambled through the narrow metal pipe. Rust scraped my palms and ruined my gray dress. Marlin pushed ahead, his flashlight cutting a dim path through the darkness. The tunnel was smaller than the blueprints suggested. Water began to seep through the seams of the iron. I could hear the roar of the Cumberland River just feet away. Every thud from the vault above shook the walls. I felt the pressure of the earth pressing in. The tunnel was a narrowing throat. A jagged piece of rebar caught my shoulder. I hissed as the metal tore through skin and fabric. Marlin didn't stop to check the wound. He knew the timer on Vane's detonator was likely ticking down. We reached a vertical ladder that led to a concealed hatch. The rungs were slick with slime and river silt. I climbed with one hand, holding the drive tight. My heart hammered against my chest. The air grew thin and smelled of wet rot. We were almost out. Marlin shoved the hatch open, and we spilled onto the muddy bank. The rain had turned into a deluge. Behind us, the distribution center sat silent and dark. Then, a low vibration hummed beneath our feet. A massive section of the riverbank simply vanished into the water. The vault had imploded, dragging the evidence and Vane's secrets into the mud. I looked at the drive in my hand. It was the only thing left. Vane's shadow was nowhere to be seen. We retreated to the car hidden in the trees. Marlin started the engine and killed the headlights. He looked at my bloody shoulder and then at the drive. "That thing is a death warrant," he whispered, I didn't care about the danger anymore. I only cared about the leverage. We needed to decrypt the files before Vane found us. I realized Grant had played me one last time. He wanted me to find this. He wanted me to kill his boss. We drove to a safe house near the university. The interior smelled of old books and lemon polish. It was a place Grant never visited. I plugged the drive into a clean laptop and waited. The screen flickered to life, showing a complex directory of names. I saw politicians, judges, and city council members listed in alphabetical order. Each folder contained scanned photos and recorded calls. This wasn't just debt. It was a map of a shadow government. Grant was the ultimate librarian. I clicked on a folder labeled Judge Eleanor Green. My breath stopped. The woman who laughed in the courtroom was on this drive. There were photos of her meeting Lydia White at a private club. They were discussing the Panama transfers months before the hearing. The laughter wasn't for me. It was for the show they were putting on. The entire trial was a scripted performance. I felt a sick realization wash over me. I hadn't won anything. I was just a pawn. "Marlon, look at this," I said, my voice trembling. He leaned in and his face turned to stone. He saw the dates on the photos. The FBI had been played as well. The information I provided was used to prune Vane's rivals. Grant used me to clean house so he could rise higher. I wasn't the strategist, I was the janitor. I stared at the screen until the letters blurred. The power balance hadn't shifted toward me. It had moved further away. I realized why Vane hadn't killed me in the vault. He needed me to survive long enough to deliver the drive to the FBI. Once the files were in the system, the blackmail would be permanent. The government would own the people on that list. I had to destroy the drive or leak it to the world. If I kept it, I was an accomplice. If I gave it away, I was a target. My fingers hovered over the delete key. I felt watched. A soft click sounded from the hallway behind us. I didn't turn around. I saw the reflection in the black laptop screen. Victor Vane was standing in the doorway. He wasn't wearing the gray suit anymore. He wore a police uniform. He looked at Marlon and nodded once. Marlon didn't move to draw his weapon. He simply stepped away from the desk. "I am sorry, Adeline," Marlon said quietly. The man I trusted had been on the payroll the entire time. The cold realization of Marlon's betrayal settled into my bones like ice. I stared at the dark reflection of the police uniform in the laptop screen. My hand remained frozen over the keyboard, millimeters from the delete key. Vane stepped into the room. His movements slow and deliberate. He didn't reach for a holster or shout orders. He simply sat on the edge of the antique desk. "Marlon has been very loyal to the fund," Vane said softly. The safe house had become a trap. I shifted my gaze to Marlon, but he wouldn't look at me. He was busy staring at the lemon-polished floor. The wound on my shoulder throbbed, a hot reminder of the vault's collapse. "How long?" I asked, my voice surprisingly steady. Vane chuckled and adjusted his police cap. "Since the university days, Adeline. We fund the best students." I realized my entire escape plan had been monitored from the start. Every secret I told Marlon went straight to the gray suit. The trust was gone. "You need that drive to keep the city in line," I said. I slowly moved my fingers away from the keys. Vane nodded. His eyes fixed on the silver casing of the hard drive. He didn't know I had already initiated a background upload. A small blue progress bar flickered at the bottom of the display. It was at 40%. I needed to keep him talking for 3 more minutes. The pressure was a physical weight on my chest. I had to play the victim one last time. Vane leaned closer, the scent of industrial soap clinging to him. "Grant was a fool to underestimate you, but I won't." He reached for the laptop, but I pulled it back. "The judge is in the files." I blurted out. He stopped, his hand hovering in the air. "I know." That's why she laughed. I felt a flicker of power return to my side. He didn't realize I had seen the photos of her with Lydia. He thought I was still in the dark. I stood up, using the laptop as a shield between us. The files aren't just here. I lied. I sent a copy to a dead man's switch. Vane's expression didn't change, but his eyes narrowed. He looked at Marlon, who finally looked up with a flash of doubt. The lie was working. I needed to create a wedge between the hunter and his hound. If I don't check in, the media gets everything. The progress bar hit 60%. The air in the room felt electric and thin. She's bluffing, Marlon said, though his voice lacked conviction. He knew my marketing background meant I understood distribution. I watched the two men trade a silent, tense look. Vane took a step back, his hand resting on his belt. He was weighing the risk of killing me against the risk of the leak. I squeezed the laptop tighter. My fingers were slick with sweat and blood. The hum of the cooling fan seemed to fill the silent room. Time was moving too slowly. Suddenly, a loud crackle from the front of the house. Vane spun around, drawing a silenced pistol in one fluid motion. Someone was kicking in the door. I didn't wait to see who it was. I lunged for the heavy bronze lamp on the desk. I swung it with every bit of strength I had left. It connected with the side of Vane's head. He crumpled to the floor, his weapon skittering across the wood. Marlon froze in the corner. He looked terrified. The progress bar hit 90%. I ignored the chaos in the hallway and focused on the screen. A new window popped up, requesting a final confirmation. I hit the enter key just as the door to the office burst open. It wasn't the FBI or Vane's cleaners. It was my son, Ethan, holding a heavy tire iron. He had tracked my phone's emergency signal after I missed our dinner check-in. His face was streaked with rain and rage. He looked at Marlon, then at the fallen man. "Mom, get in the car," he commanded. I grabbed the drive and the laptop, stumbling toward the exit. We ran through the house, passing the broken front door. The rain was still a relentless curtain of gray. I saw our old SUV idling at the curb. Ethan shoved me into the passenger seat and floored the accelerator. We swerved around a black sedan that was blocking the driveway. I looked at the laptop one last time. The upload was complete. The files were now in the hands of the public. As we reached the highway, I checked the drive's encryption log. I saw a hidden partition I hadn't noticed before. It wasn't labeled with a name or a date. It was labeled with my own social security number. I opened it with trembling hands. Inside was a single video file from 10 years ago. It showed Grant and Lydia standing in a hospital room. They were holding a document over a sleeping woman. It was my medical power of attorney. They had owned me before we ever married. The video played in the flickering light of the speeding SUV. 10 years ago, Grant and Lydia had signed the papers while I was sedated after Ethan's birth. They hadn't just taken my money, they had legally claimed my very existence. Ethan gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white against the dark plastic. "They're following us, Mom," he said, checking the side mirror. A pair of headlights cut through the rain, closing the gap. The predator was back on our heels. I shut the laptop and shoved it into my bag. I needed to reach the local news station before the network could kill the signal. My shoulder burned with a rhythmic, pulsing heat that blurred my vision. If we stopped, we were dead. If we kept going, we risked a high-speed crash in the deluge. I looked at the drive one last time. It wasn't just evidence anymore. It was the only shield we had left against the White family legacy. Ethan swerved into a narrow alleyway near the riverfront. The car behind us skidded, the screech of tires echoing off the brick walls. We hit a puddle that sent a sheet of black water over the windshield. For a second, we were blind. Then the world snapped back into focus. A police cruiser blocked the far end of the alley. Vane was already there, waiting for us with a calm, practiced smile. He knew every turn we would take. "Get out of the car," Vane shouted over the roar of the rain. He didn't have his weapon drawn this time. He held a tablet instead, showing a live feed of the upload I had just finished. The progress bar was frozen at 99%. You forgot the firewall. Adeline, he called out. He had intercepted the data before it reached the public servers. My heart sank into my stomach. The victory I felt minutes ago was a hollow lie. I stepped out into the mud, holding the hard drive high. I didn't forget the firewall, Victor. I replied. I pointed to the tablet in his hand. A new window popped up on his screen, showing a secondary transfer. I hadn't sent the files to the news. I had sent them to the IRS. They were the only ones Vane couldn't buy or threaten. His smile finally vanished. He looked at the screen as if it were a ticking bomb. Suddenly, a second pair of sirens wailed from the main street. It wasn't the local police. 3 black SUVs with federal plates boxed Vane in. Marlon stepped out of the first one. But he wasn't in handcuffs. He was wearing a tactical vest. Revealing that his apparent betrayal at the safe house was a necessary performance to keep Vane from firing, while the feds moved into position. He had been working a deep cover sting against Vane all along. The betrayal was a play, Adeline, he said, walking toward me. He handed me a clean cloth for my shoulder. I looked down at the decoy drive. It was empty, a final marketing trick to lure Vane into the open. The real encrypted data had been safely recorded on the smart watch I had kept hidden under my sleeve ever since. I sensed it to the locker's hidden terminal in the vault.